Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. Today we're doing a deep dive into Beam Therapeutics. They're working on some really interesting stuff in the world of gene editing, and they're even pioneering something called base editing. We're going to take a look at their research, their financials, and even get a feel for what the market thinks about them. Should be an exciting one.
Beam Therapeutics is fascinating. They're not just editing genes, they're editing them with incredible precision.
Okay, yeah, that's what caught my eye too. But first, just for anyone who needs a quick refresher, can you explain exactly what Beam does?
Yeah, so they're developing genetic medicines, but what makes them stand out is they're using this really cool tech base editing. So instead of cutting DNA strands like traditional gene editing, they actually just change the individual base pairs.
Okay, so instead of scissors, they're using a scalpel.
Exactly. It's like changing a single letter in a whole encyclopedia of DNA. Super precise.
That's wild. Okay, so what does that mean for actual patients? What kind of stuff is in their pipeline?
Well, they're targeting some serious conditions. One of their main candidates is Beam 101. It's for sickle cell disease.
Oh, wow. And how does that one work?
So it's an ex vivo cell therapy, which means they take the patient's cells, edit them, and then put those cells back into the patient. And for Beam 101, they're basically editing the cells to increase fetal hemoglobin production.
Okay, hold on. Backed up for a sec. Why is fetal hemoglobin important here?
Good question. Fetal hemoglobin is a type of hemoglobin that we produce in the womb, and it's much better at carrying oxygen than the adult type of hemoglobin.
Gotcha. So they're trying to get the body to produce more of the good stuff.
Clever. Exactly. And by increasing those levels, they're hoping to, reduce the bad effects of sickle cell disease.
So that could be huge for patients. What else is in the works?
They're also working on Beam 302, and this one targets alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency.
I've heard of that. It causes problems with the liver and lungs, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's pretty serious. But it looks like all of this is still in development, right? They're not actually selling any of these therapies yet.
That's right. They're still pre-revenue, which means all of their income is coming from things like research collaborations and grants.
Exactly. So we need to take a look at how they're managing their finances, how long their cash runway is, stuff like that.
Okay, so before we get to the numbers side of things, let's talk about the people running the show. What can you tell me about Beam's leadership?
They've got a really experienced team, starting with the CEO, John Evans. He's got a long history in biotech, and it seems like he's built a strong team.
So, are these just scientists, or do they also have people with solid business experience?
Oh, they definitely have a good mix. And it looks like the team is really committed to both scientific rigor, but also being patient-centric, which is cool to see. They even ranked really high on the Boston Globe's best places to work list, which I think says a lot about their culture.
Yeah, that's a good sign. Happy employees often means a company is doing something right. But happy employees need to get paid. So how are they spending their money? What does their spending strategy look like?
So research and development is definitely a top priority for them. They spent almost $368 million on R&D in 2024 alone.
Wow, that's a lot of money. But they're not just burning through cash randomly, are they?
Right.
What else are they doing?
No, they're actually being quite strategic. For example, they acquired this company called Beam Therapeutics. They specialize in non-viral drug delivery.
Okay, that sounds interesting, but I'm not really familiar with that.
Yeah.
Why is non-viral drug delivery so important?
Well, it's a big deal because it basically allows them to deliver these gene therapies without using viruses, as a delivery vehicle.
So, it opens up a lot more possibilities.
Exactly. New target tissues, maybe even whole new categories of diseases they could treat. Plus, they've also got these deals with big pharma companies like Eli Lilly and Pfizer. That brings in some cash up front and some valuable expertise.
Smart move.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're clearly not afraid to spend money. But how are they doing financially overall? I mean, they're pre-revenue.
Right. But as of the end of last year, 2024, they had over $850 million in cash and cash equivalents.
Okay, so that's a decent chumpy change. How long is that supposed to last them?
Well, analysts think they can make it into 2027 with that. And they're always looking for ways to, bring in more cash and minimize the risk. Those partnerships we talked about, funding rounds, stuff like that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So they've got cash, a strong team, and a smart strategy. But what does the market think about all of this? Are investors as excited about Beam as we are? We'll find out right after the break.
Well, the market seems pretty optimistic overall. A lot of the analysts think base editing could really shake things up in the gene editing space. They seem to like Beam's pipeline, and their whole approach to this.
So what's that mean for their stock? Do people think it's a good buy?
Right. Yeah, a lot of the analysts have buy readings on it, and some even have strong buy. Their price targets suggest there's potential for it to go, significantly higher from where it's trading now.
Interesting. So the market is definitely taking notice of this technology.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's not just the analysts.
Really? Who else is interested?
You've got some really big institutional investors putting money into Beam, like BlackRock, Vanguard, even ARK Investment Management.
Wow, those are some of the big players.
Hmm.
That definitely adds to their credibility.
For sure. When you see that kind of interest, from those kinds of institutions, it usually means they think the company has some serious long-term potential.
Okay, so we've got groundbreaking technology, a good management team. The market seems to like them. Big investors are on board. It's starting to sound like a no-brainer. But I know there's always two sides to every story. What are the risks with Beam? What could go wrong?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, like any clinical stage biotech company, they have their fair share of challenges.
Okay, so like what? What are the things that potential investors should be wary of?
The biggest one is that they don't have any products on the market yet.
Right.
So their success is going to depend on them getting through clinical trials, getting regulatory approvals, and all of that can be really tricky and expensive and unpredictable.
So no guarantees, for sure. What else?
And even if they do get approval for their therapies, then they've got to actually figure out how to, make them at scale, get them to patients, convince doctors to prescribe them. That's a whole other challenge. And it's a really competitive landscape.
Right, lots of other companies working on gene editing therapies too.
Exactly. And some of them are bigger with more resources. Weem's got to figure out how to, stand out from the crowd and really prove that their base editing approach is the best way to go.
So it's a high-risk, high-reward situation.
Yeah.
To get a better sense of all this, I think it would be helpful to do a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Yeah, that's a good idea. SWOT analysis is always helpful for figuring out where a company stands. Let's start with their strengths.
Okay, so what are Beam's biggest advantages? What sets them apart?
Well, obviously, their base editing technology is a huge advantage. It's potentially safer, more precise, just better than the older gene editing techniques.
Right.
They also have a lot of intellectual property, patents, to protect their inventions, that sort of thing.
So other companies can't just steal their ideas.
Exactly. And then, of course, they've got that experienced leadership team we were talking about, and they're really focused on, trying to solve these medical problems that don't really have good solutions right now. All of that makes them pretty attractive to investors.
It does. Okay, but every coin has two sides. What about their weaknesses? What are their vulnerabilities?
Well, their biggest weakness is the one we already talked about, no approved products. That makes them very reliant on, outside funding. And their R&D expenses are pretty high, and they're still a relatively small company compared to some of the giants in this industry. So those are definitely challenges they need to overcome.
So financial stability and competition, those are things to keep an eye on. But what about opportunities? Where could Beam really take off?
I think the biggest opportunity is just the fact that gene editing is still a pretty new field. It's got tons of potential for growth and expansion, and Beam is, really well positioned to take advantage of that, especially as personalized medicine becomes more and more popular. That's really where they shine.
Yeah, it's like being on the ground floor of a medical revolution.
Right. They could discover new applications for base editing, target even more diseases. It's pretty exciting to think about.
It is. Okay, so last but not least, let's talk about threats. What are the biggest challenges they're facing?
Well, the biggest threat is probably the competition. Like we talked about, there are some big players in the space, and they're not going to just sit back and let Beam take over.
Makes sense. Anything else?
And then there are always the regulatory hurdles. The FDA has to approve all these therapies before they can be sold. And there are safety concerns, too. Anytime you're messing with people's DNA, there's always a chance that something could go wrong.
So it's definitely a high-risk, high-reward kind of investment.
Yeah.
But what about the ethical side of things? I mean, gene editing is powerful stuff. Do we really want to be messing with our DNA?
That's a really important question. Anytime you're dealing with something that has the potential to alter, the human genome, you have to think about the ethics of it.
So is Beam doing anything to address those concerns? Are they being transparent about their work?
Well, they've said publicly that they're committed to, having open conversations with scientists, regulators, the public, basically everyone involved, to make sure that this technology is developed and used responsibly.
Okay, that's good to hear. So they're not just focused on the science, they're thinking about the big picture too. But let's get back to the investment side of things for a second. After weighing all these factors, the good and the bad. What's your verdict? Is Beam Therapeutics a buy?
That's the question everyone wants answered, right? It's a really interesting company doing cutting-edge work. I mean, they could change the world. But they've also got some big hurdles to overcome.
So it's a tough call. What would you say to someone who's thinking about investing?
I would say do your homework. Read everything you can about them. Don't just jump in because it sounds cool. Look at their financials, understand the science, learn about their management team, make an informed decision.
Right, investing is always risky, but especially with these pre-revenue biotech companies.
Exactly. And remember, we're not giving financial advice here. This is just, a starting point for your own research.
Yeah, for sure. We're just trying to give people the information they need to make their own decisions.
Subscribe while you're there.
And while you're down there in the description, let us know what you think. Would you invest in Beam Therapeutics? Why or why not? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, we love getting feedback from our listeners. And who knows, maybe you'll even give us some ideas for future deep dives.
We're always looking for new companies to explore. But for now, this is where we wrap up our deep dive into the amazing world of Beam Therapeutics. Hope you found it informative, maybe even a little bit inspiring.
It is pretty mind-blowing to think about the potential of gene editing to, really transform medicine. And Beam is right at the forefront of it all. It's going to be really interesting to see what they do next.
It is. All right, everyone, that's it for this episode. See you next time for another deep dive.